everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Technically Speaking with DTL. As always, I am Jillian.
I'm Jazz.
I'm David.
And we have a very special guest today. But before we introduce her, as we spoke of in last episode, July is Mental Health Awareness Month, and it's for the African American community. And we wanted to bring in some people who this is their thing. This is what they do. And that leads us to our next guest. And I'm going to let her introduce herself. This is Jovan. And I'm not going to be as extra as other people when they had their fellow alum. But I do want to point out that this lovely woman is a graduate of North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University. But I'm going to let her introduce herself.
Pride.
Pride.
Everybody got to go somewhere.
There you go.
I reckon.
I mean, I'm just saying, but I didn't do as much as you did last week. But I'm going to let
I didn't even do that much.
introduce herself
clear.
and give a brief bio of who you are and what you want the people to know about you.
Okay, well, thank you first for having me, you guys. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Jovan Shumpert, and I am a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Indiana. And then I'm also a licensed clinical mental health counselor associate with North Carolina. I am a native of St. Louis, Missouri. I've done a number of moving around. And so I am happy to say that I'm happy to be back home, what I consider home in North Carolina. I graduated from A&T, as Jillian pointed out. I'm a double Aggie, so I went there for both my undergraduate degree, which I received a bachelor's in psychology, and then I also returned for a master's in clinical mental health counseling. I would say that I also specialize in working with Black people and other marginalized groups. I see a number of different types of people. I would say specifically, I work with a great deal of Black women, just given our very unique position in life, being both woman as well as Black, and how those things intersect. I also have a private practice that's called Becoming.growing.learning, LLC. And so I started that when I was living in Indiana. I've been in business for about a year. So I started that at the top of COVID. I looked at that as a great opportunity.
Right.
And just also knowing that Indiana lacks in Black mental health therapists. And so I said, why not make myself available? And so, so that's been good so far. And I work with people with a number of challenges, whether it's just depression or anxiety. I shouldn't have said just, because I don't want to minimize those things. But typically the people that come in are dealing with anxiety, depression, maybe problems with maintaining boundaries with their loved ones. I heard someone once say that most people come into therapy for the people that they deal with in their lives and not necessarily for themselves. So sometimes I can see that being a true statement.
Yes.
But
on to me.
She said you speaking all to her.
Yeah.
Just keep it coming. Keep it coming.
But yeah, so also I work with a number of people that are in the LGBTQIA plus community. I also work with women that identify as being Muslim, wives, single moms. And so I would say I primarily work with women. And so it's been a great ride. I enjoy it. I feel like it's my calling. And so, like I said, I am happy to be here today to talk about it.
Right. Awesome. And that kind of brings us to our first point. How you said you primarily work with women, because we are more likely to go seek help. Do you feel that's a true fact, that I'm saying that women primarily will go reach out and, seek help when needed?
Yeah, I would say I definitely agree with that from my experience, at least, and just also knowing, patriarchy has a big part in that, just as far as, the way that boys and men are often raised, don't cry, you're a sissy, or you're going to cry like a little girl, toughen up, all of those things. So we're teaching kids initially to just cut off their feelings. Their feelings don't matter. and then if you do express some type of feelings as being a boy, it's like the acceptable ones are like to be aggressive
Mhm.
and maybe even to be like sexual. But beyond those two things, nothing else is appropriate. Anything else is being a girl.
Right.
And so, girls on the other hand are taught to, express everything but anger.
Right.
And so that leads to us internalizing and not necessarily being able to express when something is bothering us or when something is wrong.
And then we come up with this superwoman complex, right? So, we got to
Right.
save everybody but ourselves. And Meek Mill tweeted out the other day that we have to, I can't remember. I should have pulled
Make
it up.
mental health cool in the Black community.
Yeah, make mental
or
health
something like that.
Something like that. Or make therapy cool
Yeah.
in the Black community again, which
Mhm.
I thought was powerful for a Black
Yes.
man who many people do see as a man's man to say,
Yeah.
we need to
To
normalize. Because
Yeah.
you didn't hear of us going into, therapy or, looking for help. You pray about it and then
Let the Lord do his work.
you let the Lord do his work, but we're suffering. We
Yes.
are suffering
As a community
silence.
and as individuals.
Yeah, in silence. And like you said, most people go to therapy because of their surroundings. Sometimes it doesn't necessarily, mean something is wrong with you. Can you kind of speak on that?
Yeah, and also just coming from like a trauma-informed lens, it's often, I like the fact that people often talk about rather than what's wrong with you, it's like what happened to you. And so that is a powerful statement in that it's not just, you being a bad person or you having these, issues. It's about, well, what things are happening in life that are impacting you? What abuses did you experience? What, not even abuses necessarily, but what kind of grief are you carrying around? So whatever, other things that can be happening. And then when it comes to the stigma, a lot of us, grew up near, around, in the church. I say I grew up around the church. But, it's often told, like you guys were talking about, as far as, praying it away, and then just also in the Black community. So we also have, what happens in the family stays in the family. Don't trust anybody outside of it. We sweep things under the rug, right? So there are a number of cases of abuse that happen within our community, and it's often not talked about. We also have a number of, people dealing with substance use challenges. That's not talked about because we think of it as like normal. That's just Uncle so-and-so. We know he's going to have his little bottle of gin or whatever in a brown paper bag, and we're going to act like that's not a thing, right? But we know that something is going on with Uncle so-and-so or Aunt so-and-so.
So I guess one of my questions is like, how do you encourage more people to do it? Like for myself, I grew up without my mom, without the influence of my mom, I'll say that. And in 2008, I lost my dad and my best friend within 4 months. And so, it kind of was hard for me to kind of go out there and step out there and say, yeah, I need help. But I said, hey, let me go out there and get it done because I recognized it was something within me that I had to deal with. So how do you encourage more people to do it? Especially, I know you did with Black females, but how do you get also more men to want to go out there and want to do it?
Yeah, I think that's something that's going to take society to kind of help out with that. Luckily, we are seeing more Black women and Black men going into the field, therefore assisting with being able to see someone that looks like you, right? Because I know that I wouldn't necessarily see a white therapist if, if I were seeking a therapist, and I've had therapy myself. So I'm very open with my experiences with therapy. I talk about it with friends. I talk about it, on social media. I might just say, well, I got this nugget from my therapist, or, I had this revelation. So I think it starts there with more people being honest about going to therapy. And I would say like our parents and grandparents and things like that, they didn't necessarily have the opportunity to go to therapy like we do, right? So I want to recognize that, they coped the best way that they could. And so now, millennials and Gen Zers, we have access. There are a number of programs that are available to help people kind of offset the cost because it can be costly. But specifically for Black men, I think even though Black women encourage therapy and all of that, I think it's really going to take a number of Black men that are working on healing themselves, that are working on, bringing in other men, right? So a lot of times, like even on the subjects of like Black men, Black women, there's always like Black men telling Black women what they should do. In reality, they should be talking to other Black men and raising them up and teaching them how to be men and teaching them how to be good human beings. And a part of that comes with being vulnerable, so making sure that we're raising a generation of kids that says, it's okay to cry. You're human. It's okay to feel sadness. It's okay to be anxious, because if you're anxious, that means you're scared. And that's one thing that you don't want to be as a Black man, is scary.
I could listen to you talk all day long. Like, I'm just so, and I don't know if it's your voice is just calming or what it is, but like everything you're saying, I just receive it all. But I do have a question. As a Black woman who is constantly dealing with the superwoman complex and with anxiety, I'm trying to find a new therapist, and it does not seem to be working well in my favor at this moment. So do you have any advice or tips for me or anybody else who probably deals with the same things that I'm dealing with when it comes to finding a therapist?
Yeah, so I usually tell people about a few different sites. One of them is Therapy for Black Girls. So that was started by Dr. Joy. She's a psychologist in Atlanta. So she also has a podcast, and then she also has a directory. And so if you log onto that website, you're able to see the therapist. So these are Black women that are therapists, and you're able to look at their faces, read their bios, and also just kind of connect with them. So you're able to, you can always ask for a consultation. Most people are willing to give you like a 10 to 15 minute consultation, just so you can kind of get an idea of their, their therapy philosophy or their theory, their lens, how they, view people. And then you're also able to hear about you're also able to hear their voice to sound like, okay, does this person sound soothing? Does this person, is this person really nasally? Is this person going to be someone that I can listen to on a weekly basis? So that's one. I also recommend Psychology Today. While you can't necessarily look up Black therapists specifically through their search engine, you can scroll through and look at the different faces, and then also looking at their biographies. So I'm really big on, reading their biography, seeing what they specialize in. So it gives you a lot of information from that page. And once again, seeking a consultation. And it can be challenging, especially depending on, where you are. The great thing with telehealth is that now we have access to a number of therapists that we maybe didn't have access to before. So, given your location, you can look up people in all around your state that you should be able to work with, right? Because we have to specifically be licensed for the state that we're working in. So for me, when I was in Indiana, I lived in Kokomo, Indiana, which is a small town that's, an hour north of Indianapolis. But I had clients that were in Indianapolis. I had clients that were in Gary. I had clients that were like all over the state. And that was also because it's hard to find a Black therapist in Indiana. So, so, I was a hot commodity when it came to that, because, they came searching because they specifically wanted that.
Yeah. So are you starting to see more Black therapists come in? Because even most of my therapists have been Black females. I never really had a Black male as a therapist. So are you starting to see more Blacks get into therapy?
I wouldn't say that the numbers are as much as we would want to see, but I think it is increasing, just like we're seeing, an increase in Black men going into education. Even when I think back to my bachelor's program, there weren't a lot of Black men in that program.
Yeah.
In my master's program, I counted maybe about 5 or 6 out of the entire, program. So I think it is changing, but not fast enough.
And I think as more influencers and celebrities and people that have this power over this reach, as they like speak more on it and say let's normalize it and say, hey, I do this, I think more people will go into the field, like just like education. and, or sports, like just
Mhm.
really pushing. But I think what you said about consultations and calling and finding that right fit is so important because I myself have gone to therapy a couple times. I've had different therapists. And I think as you matriculate through life and mature, your needs change. So your therapist will have to change because it will have to fit to where you are now. Like I'm big on saying, I don't go to therapy because something is wrong. I go because it is an amazing experience to have somebody who doesn't know me, doesn't know the people I'm around, listen to me and not have, that has this unbiased viewpoint. But at one time, I probably was going through something, and that's why I chose, like you said,
Mhm.
something traumatic happened, and that's why when you realize, oh, I should probably go talk to somebody, but it doesn't have to be trauma related. I just enjoy talking to somebody with an unbiased viewpoint of who I am, and it took me a while to find a new
Yeah.
one because what I needed before is not what I need now.
I think that's why it's important to go through premarital counseling. A lot of people was talking last week about premarital counseling and how a lot of people don't decide not to go, but I think that's the reason why you should go to get an unbiased opinion of how marriage should be, especially if we're going into people that's never been married before.
Right.
To get that other side of you from somebody that has been married for a while. So yeah, and that's why I think that's definitely important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And even when it comes to premarital counseling, I'm not against you going to your pastor, but I think in lieu of that, you need to see an actual counselor, somebody that, went to school, that, has that experience, that clinical knowledge in order to work with you. Both things can be helpful. I don't think that there's, one's better than the other, but I think that there are some limitations that can happen. And especially, with that bias that can happen a lot within the church, and you're not going to be able to express most times what's really happening within the relationship. And so when you go to somebody that's maybe outside of the church, you're going to be able to be more yourself and, express yourself the way that you need to express yourself. And once again, have that unbiased person, someone that doesn't know you, does not have any skin in the game. They're just there to help the couple.
Now, the church and mental health has been a real hot topic here lately for a lot of people. And the general consensus is the church doesn't fully support or doesn't have the tools to fully support what people need when it comes to therapy or getting help with mental issues, any of those things, all of that under that window. So for someone like you who said you grew up around the church, how do you feel about churches trying to be more inclusive? Or what can churches do to try to be more inclusive of these aspects?
Hmm. So I will say that I can appreciate, and it's been a lot of the white churches that I've seen that have began to have like actual therapy centers that are in their that are in the church, right? So it's a branch, it's something that's important to them. And so they have a therapist that they pay to be there for their congregation. That's something that I haven't necessarily seen with Black churches. I mean, I can definitely, be wrong, but I have not heard of that yet. I might hear about, some people, maybe having a therapist that attends, or might have, somebody that they know of that they might share that information. But I think it's really important to maybe have somebody that's there. I think it's, important for the pastor or whomever is the leader of the church to normalize that and to get away from, the stigma of mental health challenges and saying, that's nothing but the devil. So you have to change that messaging as well, that's within the church, and to be able to encourage people to say, well, God put these people here also to help us, just like they brought, God, provided doctors and nurses and whomever else to, help us throughout this life. So we also need, mental health counselors, and that's just as important. So I think just like, in regular life outside of the church, that, the way that we're socialized needs to change. I think the way that the church has traditionally thought about therapy, thought about family and things like that, that needs to change as well.
Yeah. And I think that's just like religion as a whole. Like we talked about it last week. Historically, therapy was not an option for us. We had to hold on to our trauma. We had to fight through. We had to push through. And as you said, millennials and Gen Z, now that we have these resources, we just need to push because, I think there has to be a separation at some point. Like, I think when you think of the church, yes, that's where you get your spiritual guidance and that's, where you get your morals and values. But when you get into the therapy aspect, it's just a different feeling. Like knowing that what you say right there in that moment isn't going anywhere. It's not judging. It's no judgment. It's nobody saying, well,
And you
the
hear
Bible says that
Right.
you should,
No, you don't come.
Okay,
you hear
but I
me.
am human. And
Yes.
last time I checked, there's only one perfect person. So
Right.
and he is not here. So
Right.
I think we have to normalize that as well. Yes, I'm gonna still get my spiritual feeding from, and this is where I get most of my grounding, but my self-worth.
That's true.
Me as the individual, I need this, and this is what's gonna help me because I'm not having that guilt factor. Like I think at no point have I ever had an experience where I felt guilty for anything, for feeling how I'm feeling, for doing what I'm doing, and we just got to normalize that, right? The practice.
It wasn't until Jovan just said it that I realized that our parents and our grandparents didn't have the same access. We talk about how we're changing things and moving the needle with our generation, but it did not dawn on me that it's not because they didn't want to, but maybe it really was because they couldn't. There probably weren't any Black therapists. Yeah. We talked to the church. We made the church man. Grandma's
the barbershop, the barber,
the hair salon, the nail salon, all of that. Yeah.
All the time, that's pretty much what we get most of our talk about. So we gotta get.
So the barbershop needs to normalize going to therapy.
We need a therapist at the barbershop.
We need a therapist.
All hairstylists need to be trained.
Hairstylists, y'all have once you get your hair done, y'all go over here, see,
get your little therapy.
I like it already.
I actually have a friend that's talking about because she's going to be entering into cosmetology school and she's a therapist. So she's actually considering like having a studio that is like yoga and then also have something for people to do.
I would go.
I do like
also having and also having a place where they can, get therapy. So I thought that was an awesome idea. And it's kind of combining those very important things to us, and making it accessible, right? So I always talked about wanting to have some type of a practice where, you kind of had every need met there. I haven't quite figured out what that would look like, but just being able to have like a one-stop shop and you're not having to go all over town to kind of get in. So I think that was an awesome idea that she was able to kind of slowly put that together.
I like it.
And then it puts it in the self-care aspect. Because I also think of therapy as a form of self-care. I know some people think of it as just like one more thing to do. I'm already busy. I already got so much to do. Like therapy is one more thing. But I think of it like self-care.
Because I make time for my hair and my nails. I can make time for therapy.
But we also got to think about the meaningful conversations that we have with our friends too. But sometimes they're not licensed therapists, but sometimes we do have some meaningful conversations. Like I'm pretty sure when you reach girls tell you some things.
Your friends can also help you make really bad decisions. They're not biased because they are biased.
They have you in mind. But sometimes you need that. I need my friends to have my back at this moment. And when you give me all the bad advice that you give me, follow it up with saying, but talk to your therapist. Because this is what I would do.
They're not gonna say talk to your therapist.
But you know what? I'm gonna start saying that now. When I give out my advice, this is what I would do, but then go talk to you.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to say that those elders in our community are still valuable. The pastor is still valuable. Big Mama is still valuable, right? So they still have that life experience that I think would, still be valuable. But especially if you're dealing with some, mental health challenges, you're thinking about possibly killing yourself or harming someone else, or, you're having trouble functioning, like getting to work on time, taking care of your kids or taking care of your household or, your activities of daily living, like hygiene things. You definitely want to see a therapist. But those community leaders and things like that, they still have some value. And I definitely don't want to disparage that. but I'm also a proponent of therapy. I think it's all about finding the right therapist for you. And, it might take a couple tries, right? So it might have to take beyond that consultation to really get a good feel for that therapist. So I've had someone that, we did the consultation and they actually came for the intake, which is the assessment piece. And they did the assessment and for whatever reason decided not to, go with me. And that was their right. And so they were kind of dealing with therapists in that respect to see like, okay, well, let me see how things go when we're in an actual session. It's not my favorite thing, but especially to have to kind of retell all of that, information, those intimate details about your life. That's a lot to have to do over and over and over again. So I highly suggest taking advantage of a consultation and going from there. But sometimes it is hit or miss. And I like what you said, Jillian, earlier about, certain therapists maybe being able to serve a certain part of your life. Like my college counselor is not necessarily the person that I'm going to see now.
Right.
Or even the person I saw in undergrad is not necessarily the person I'm gonna see now, right? They helped for those certain stages. But me being, an adult and a mother and, being a Black woman, I need something else. I need to be fed in a different way.
Yeah.
Some of us just don't realize that we have some things going on with us too as well. It might be coming to work and we've been tired all the time and just feeling like fatigued, and sometimes not realizing that sometimes you kind of do need to talk about stuff. So I guess my question to that is, how do you, as a person that I guess may not see therapy as an option, but realize that you have some things that might be going on where you do need to go see somebody? Because we do have a lot of people that just got a lot of things going on in their life, and they just think, I'm gonna deal with it, but they don't realize they need to go. You know what I'm saying?
So that is a good question. Unfortunately, there's not a lot that can be done as far as that individual that, unless they have other people in their lives that are noticing these things, right? So, but if you're surrounded by people that think that this is normal, or, they're used to chaos and you're used to chaos, and there's nobody really to like tap you on that shoulder and be like, hey, I'm really concerned. Maybe you should see your doctor and maybe, share some of your concerns. That's going to be very difficult if you don't think that there's anything wrong. Like you think that this pain or whatever you're dealing with is normal. So hopefully many of us, I'm hoping that those that do feel that way have at least one person in their lives that'll say like, hey, I'm noticing this, whatever way they choose to say it, right? So everybody's not going to sound like a therapist when they say when they say like, hey, you need some help, right? Because it's going to numb my
head. That's what you want to say.
Right. I mean,
yeah.
And I've never thought about it as, so TikTok has me hooked. And I just
Don't it though?
Yes, and I just see how people like display that it's depression, but I wouldn't have thought of it that way. Like not cleaning their room and like just living in chaos. And they were like, this is because I am depressed. But I would just think that you just don't like to clean up. I wouldn't think that's how it shows up. Or you said like personal hygiene. I know I've watched a couple where people come in with their hair matted because they just have not
put themselves together,
have not felt the need to comb their hair and to look presentable. And that's how their depression, anxiety shows up. So I think growing and learning as a person, I just didn't realize that it shows up like this. Like
it manifests in different
ways.
ways.
Yeah. So I'm glad you said that, because people might not realize that's a sign of depression. Like you're in survival mode and you just on the go and you don't realize, oh, it's just like this, but maybe it is that something is deeper. Like not that something's wrong, it's just something deeper that I need to unpack with somebody, because I think that's another thing that people, they don't want to feel like anything is wrong.
Right. They don't want to be labeled.
And they don't want to be labeled.
Like I can't handle this.
Right.
But think about like how we even do our kids, right? So if little Black girls have an attitude, right? It's like something's wrong with her. Something, nobody's asking like what's happening to her, what is she experiencing? Is she anxious, right? And so when we have these stereotypes that are now involved, labels are easily thrown out there. They're not necessarily getting the correct care.
Mhm.
And so even for little Black boys, right? So if they express like anger, or they show that they, are constantly active, can't sit down, we know that the education system, especially at that level, you're expecting for kids
Behavior
that are normal
plan.
kids to sit down
Yeah.
in one place and to
Right.
learn and to, and they're easily pathologized as being something else.
Right.
And that happens now, like
Right.
as adults.
Right. All of us come from the
Education
education
background.
realm, education background. So we saw it a lot.
Too much.
And then I think the conversation where they're like, Black women are aggressive, or they're, we'll just go with aggressive. But if you never learned how to effectively communicate, and your whole life you had to,
Assert yourself.
assert yourself in spaces where you weren't welcome,
Mhm.
that's traumatic. And I think a lot of people realize that now, but just learning how to talk to people and seeing people as they are, like, don't label me as aggressive. I'm having to assert myself because you're not valuing me as a person. And I think that's something that therapy has taught me. So you get little gems like that all the time as well. And therapy is work. Can we talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, I actually just saw a client and they said, I've been avoiding you. Like straight up, like beginning of the session, I've been avoiding you, right? Because they know that it's going to be a lot of work. It takes vulnerability, which is work. A lot of times growing up, people would think of, being vulnerable as, being weak, or being, whatever else, right? Being a crybaby, those types of things, right? But being sensitive, being vulnerable, that is bravery. In a world that teaches you that that's not acceptable, that you have to be hard, that you have to be willing to take anything and deal with things in silence.
For Black men, I feel like that's what we get. We have that. We have to be a certain way. Like even with my dad, if I look at my dad pretty much, I know my dad loved me. He said it, times to times, but it's like he always had this demeanor about him. And I feel like even when I look at my granddad, he had that same demeanor about him. It was the way it was brought up, the way he was taught. And it's like, for men, we're not supposed to show that, that we kill, or we're supposed to show that we cry, or show these emotions because it comes off as you weak. And so, yeah, I hate that stigma that we have, because a lot of Black men decide they don't want to come out and have these conversations because they feel like how they're going to be looked when they do.
Yeah. So it's definitely going to take some work there.
I think the same thing for women though. A lot of our moms, our grandmas, but a lot of it was just survival. I'm gonna do these things to survive. I'm gonna teach you these things so that you can survive, and we're just gonna make the best out of it.
Because we didn't have time. We weren't given the opportunity.
True.
To
didn't have
be
the
vulnerable.
access.
We didn't have the access to be vulnerable. And you see so many times the word left me, but on our Anglo counterparts, these things are acceptable for the double standard.
Yeah,
They can have these vulnerable moments and people will pacify. And this is not an all thing, this is not a general thing, but it is noticeable. And we just were not given that opportunity.
So to just be human.
To just be human and to be vulnerable. Because I know that's something I struggle with. I do not cry. I just suck it up and we got to get her done. But like, sometimes I just be wanting to cry. Like, let me just get this out. But nobody says,
see, that's me. I'll cry.
Girl, cry.
I will. The levee will break. I will ugly cry. And then once I have cried, I won't talk about it no more. It's over. It's done.
But that's awesome that you cry. Like I was somebody too that struggled with crying.
And it ain't cute. And I've gotten to the point where I have no other option but to cry. Nothing is fixed. It's just, okay, I've cried. Now we're just gonna move past it. And I don't like that part of me, but at the same time, I think it's part of that superwoman, Black woman syndrome where, all right, you got fed up, get it out, and then keep piling the mess back on until you need to do it again.
Yeah, and we have some people that will cry in the shower if they do cry, or they will cry in the closet, or, it's like by any means, don't let anybody know that you having a little, that you're struggling.
Right.
Which is like, what's wrong with sharing with somebody, your close friends or your spouse or your support system, that you are having a hard time? Because likely they probably having a hard time too, or they had a hard time and felt like they had to hide it as well.
Mhm.
It took me a year to cry in front of my therapist. A year.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And she was just like, you look like you wanted to cry the first day. And I was like, nope.
Right. I will sit there and stop talking to gather myself before I
and
let
I'm
a
just sitting there
tear
like,
drop.
nope,
Yeah.
these tears not
And I know
gonna
she be
dry.
looking at me like, girl, please cry.
She see all through
She
you.
see it. And I think that's another thing. You see me. Like,
That's what I need.
I think it's the you see me. And I guess that's being vulnerable. Jay-Z said one time, Black men sometimes get so defensive, like what you looking at, because they think that you see them. You see the little boy who didn't get everything he needed. You see the little boy who couldn't be vulnerable or cry or, have these emotions, who had to toughen up. And to me, that's weakness, that you can see that. Right. And it's not that I see that in you, but I feel like my therapist can see that in me. You can see.
Where everybody else sees like hardness.
Yes.
Your therapist can be like, okay, I know you're a softie on the inside, but you have to be this person
You hear me?
in the world.
Pansy.
Right. I mean, is there a class on that? Y'all took a class on that? Right. Y'all took a class to be able to see.
Look, I see you right here.
Yeah, they just make you learn how to see through people's souls. Yeah, that's the class.
Hey, speaking of classes, I want to talk a little bit about on the young folks. I'm gonna put my career services hat on for a minute here.
Okay.
And I like that you said that you did psychology, which a lot of students do psychology, but they don't realize that they need to go further and get that master's degree. And I like that you went ahead and do that. Can you speak a little bit on that for the young folks that might be in psychology and thinking about what is your next step after you get that psychology degree?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot involved with degrees and all of that, right? But with us living in this capitalistic society, unfortunately, a degree in psychology can only take you so far. And so a master's degree can assist with kind of taking that next step. If you just were interested in psychology and you decided to take psychology, as a major in undergrad, that's fine. But as far as getting a job following undergrad, that can be challenging. So I know like after undergrad for me, I was substitute teaching. I was working with children, for a cooperative extension office for HBCU back in Missouri. So yeah, I took a number of different jobs because it wasn't anything that I could automatically kind of get into. There are certain jobs like being a case manager or being a case manager or a paraprofessional or different things like that that you can get. A lot of times those things are not paid at a fair wage. And so, a master's degree can help you as far as, if you want to become a therapist, if you want to, become a social worker or whatever else. So it can help get that extra money that you're looking for. And then also gain some more clinical skills in them, because psychology, you kind of like scratching the surface. You're getting to know some of the theorists that are out there, some of the, the people that started psychology. I think it does serve a purpose, but I think the master's degree kind of specializes that a little bit more, fine tunes you a little bit more to where you're practicing those clinical skills, where we're having to, go into the lab and practice the skills that we were learning as far as, how to mirror your client's body language, or, how to lower your voice if you feel like somebody is getting too upset, too dysregulated, right? So if somebody's yelling and I start yelling, the problem is not going to stop. The yelling won't stop, right? But if I know if somebody's voice is increasing, I know that I need to lower my voice in order to diffuse the situation.
Thank you so much for saying everything.
Same
thing. Yeah, so I'm saying all the time, but to hear from a person that's done it, that's definitely you hit it on.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's expensive though to go to the master's program. So
ain't life.
I don't blame people. There's not a lot of money in master's programs as far as, PhD programs, there's some money there, but master's programs, a lot of us took out loans and
yeah.
How do you take care of yourself?
How do I take care of myself? So I have a therapist.
Mhm.
I think the more that I seek therapy and work on myself, it makes me a better therapist, right? Because I'm able to put myself in my client's shoes. I'm able to understand that discomfort that comes from talking to somebody about your innermost thoughts or situations and all
Mm.
of that. So that's been number one. Also, um, working out. I've been struggling with that the last couple of weeks because I I just transitioned to North Carolina, but yeah, working out, especially during COVID, that became very difficult. Because the gyms closed and things like that. And so, initially I was going to the gym a few times a week. Like I had my Saturday class, I would be in Zumba or, doing
Mhm.
these different things. But then when COVID started up, I was like, okay, I have to do something else. And then, I like to go on walks as well if the
Mhm.
weather's, decent. But then it was just like when it becomes too hot, then what do you do? So I eventually invested in a Peloton, and that's my little baby. And so I do a lot of cycling. Um, Also, I do meditation or deep breathing practices. Um, I listen to positive music. So a lot of times I will R&B you to death or
I like
or
it.
yeah. So I watch the things that I listen to. I try to eat fairly healthy most days.
Mm.
Drink water, sleep, right? So that's another thing that people don't notice. If you're not sleeping properly or getting an adequate amount of time in as, sleeping, you're not going to be the best person or your best self,
Right.
So I know that for me, working out, sleep, and, eating well are three of my things that I kind of have to do on top of therapy.
Mhm.
So those are my major things. And also like hanging out with friends when they are available, um, I know it can be hard with, it's different, right? When you're an undergrad, you have constant uh,
Right.
access to your friends.
Woo.
But when we all graduate, people live all over the place. And so it can get
Right.
a little harder to like have those like down for whatever, know everything about you, know who you are, beyond the mask. That can be difficult. So I would say definitely hanging around friends and family, not isolating, definitely helps.
So that's like huge takeaways because we also did a episode on physical fitness because we felt like along with getting your mental self together, your physical self also plays a big role into how that how you live better, how you become a better self. So let's do some final takeaways. So or final points. You want to start with us, David? Come
Oh,
on.
sure. Well, I definitely like, well, first of all, I wanted to say much respect to everything that you're doing. I think you're doing an awesome job. And
Thank
you're definitely
you.
showing, the many facets that we can do and the things that we need to get involved with. Definitely much respect for you. Definitely, I take away from the fact that, yeah, like you said, we do need to get more into sleep and more of our self-care. And even as a therapist, you are doing those things. And
Hmm.
so if you can do it, definitely we should be able to do it. But
Yeah, yeah.
just being there, definitely for myself and also for my wife and my family too as well. I think that will be important. So definitely taking a lot of away from what you said. So definitely much respect to you and what you're doing.
I love this episode, Jovan. I could just sit and listen to you talk all day.
Thank you.
You said so many things that applied to me as a woman, as a Black woman, as a mom, as a superwoman, just everything. But I think for me, one of the biggest things that we touched on was how therapy is work. And we need to utilize those consultations where we can. And the best way is to try to find a therapist for us.
I want to say that my biggest takeaway was, the holistic approach to this. You definitely want to find somebody. Yes, you still have your elders and your preachers and whoever your family that feed into you, but then you also have this aspect that takes care of you, your therapist, and being able to be vulnerable in those moments and building yourself up. I think that was my biggest takeaway. I think COVID and this whole pandemic has awakened a lot of things in a lot of people. So I'm sure there has been a spike and people reaching out to get
Mhm.
their mental, because when you have nothing to do but sit in your
You gotta deal with yourself. You have to deal with
sit in
yourself.
and deal with yourself and see you as a person. I think, that's when things really start to happen. So I think that's my takeaway. Just, don't count this out, but also do this. It's like, it's not an either or, it's a
Mhm.
all together. And again, with the sleeping and eating well and taking care of yourself. So thank you so much, Jovan, for coming and
Yes,
doing this
thank
for
you.
us. We really
Thank you guys for
appreciate
having
it.
me.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.